They say the suburbs are peaceful. Trees line the sidewalks, neighbors wave politely, and children ride bikes on cul-de-sacs as if they're starring in a toothpaste commercial. But no one tells you about the monsters hiding behind manicured lawns and freshly painted shutters, or the HOA president who will weaponize bylaws like a dictator clinging to power. My name is Nina Callahan, and 3 weeks ago, I was just another quiet homeowner in Maple Ridge Estates, a sleepy gated community outside of Phoenix. Now, I'm the woman who dismantled our HOA, but back then, they just called me crazy. It all started with a letter. It arrived in a pristine white envelope, slipped through my front door like a passive-aggressive ghost.
Oh no.
No knock, no warning. Just a letter signed by Margot Lively, our HOA president and full-time tyrant, demanding that I immediately remove the offensive garden gnome from my flower bed or face daily fines. That gnome wasn't just decoration. My 7-year-old daughter, Ellie, had painted it for me last Christmas. It was lopsided, chipped, and the paint was smudged from tiny hands, but it meant something. To Margot, it was visually disruptive to the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. I stared at the notice, rereading it as anger bubbled in my chest. I'd lived in Maple Ridge for 4 years, paid dues, mowed my lawn, followed the rules. But this wasn't about a gnome. It was about control. And Margot, she was the queen of control. Margot Lively wasn't just HOA president, she was the self-declared guardian of community order. Ow. A retired realtor with too much free time and a clipboard fused to her hip, she strutted through the neighborhood like she was leading a royal inspection. Always watching, always judging. She ran the HOA board like a private army, flanked by her loyal knights. 3 board members who voted however she told them to. Walt Simmons, the treasurer who'd once fined a resident for a suspiciously loud wind chime. Janet Bloom, who monitored trash can placement like a hawk. And Timothy Dale, the silent one, the kind of man who never blinked, just nodded along with Margot's every word. They weren't protecting the community, they were policing it. I wasn't always like this. I used to avoid confrontation. Used to believe in rules. But something about that letter, about Margot crossing a line into my child's world, ignited something in me. So I left the gnome exactly where it was. The next day I got another notice. This time, a fine. $50 per day until the eyesore was removed. I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. The third day, I got a warning of escalated action, threat of a lien against my property. That's when I knew. This wasn't going away. I had a choice. Remove the gnome or fight back. I chose war. What Margot didn't know, what no one in Maple Ridge knew, was that before I left the legal world, I worked in property law. I'd read hundreds of HOA bylaws. I knew how associations were supposed to operate. I also knew how often they didn't. I dusted off my old case files. I reread the Maple Ridge HOAS founding documents. And it didn't take long to find the rot violations of quorum protocols. Outdated charter filings, missing financial transparency reports, enough to sink a board 10 times over. But I couldn't go in guns blazing.
Yet.
I needed proof. I needed support. Most importantly, I needed Margot to keep underestimating me. So I played dumb. That week I began what I called Phase 1, observation. I started walking the neighborhood every morning, pretending to admire gardens and pick up trash. But in reality, I was documenting, taking photos, logging violations, not by residents, but by Margot herself. She had an unauthorized second mailbox hidden behind her hedges. Her son's Jeep had no HOA parking tag and had been left in a visitor spot overnight for weeks. Her roof? Slightly mismatched shingles, a direct violation of Section 14B of her own regulations. She was breaking the rules she enforced. But the real goldmine came when I struck up a conversation with Mrs. Carter, an elderly widow on the corner lot. Quiet, sweet, and completely terrified of the HOA. She'll fine me $200 for having Halloween lights up on November 2nd, she whispered. I paid it. I didn't want trouble. That was it. The pattern I needed. Harassment. fear, intimidation. But stories weren't enough. I needed documents. I filed a polite, formal request for access to the HOA's financial records and board. Meeting minutes, something I was legally entitled to as a DSPing member. 3 days later, I received a flat denial. For board. Eyes only, that was a violation. A big one. I wrote back, citing Arizona HOA Statute 331805. I received silence. So I did what Margot never expected a crazy, no-moving woman to do. I lawyered up by the end of the week. My kitchen table looked like a war room. Stacks of HOA documents, resident testimonials, photos, code books, legal printouts. I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was building a case. The neighborhood. I thought I was losing it, they whispered when I walked by. Margot smiled at me like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. Let them think I was crazy. Let them watch, because I was just getting started. Soon the entire neighborhood would see the truth. I wasn't crazy. I was right. The fines didn't stop. Every morning a new notice would show up tucked neatly in my mailbox or stuck to my front door like a scarlet letter. $50 here, $75 there. Margot was turning my peaceful home into a battlefield, one envelope at a time. But I didn't flinch. I paid none of it. Instead, I documented everything, every fine, every note, every petty threat. I wasn't going to fight her with fists or yelling matches. I was going to build a paper trail long enough to choke her authority. But Margot wasn't stupid. She could sense I wasn't backing down. That's when the real games began. It started small. Citation for inadequate grass trimming when my lawn was freshly mowed. Then a warning about unsanctioned bird feeders that Ellie and I had hung in our backyard for the finches. I knew this wasn't about community rules, this was personal. Margot was escalating things to test how far I'd go. The board backed her every time, rubber stamping every absurd violation. But I didn't react, not publicly. I kept walking the neighborhood, smiling, waving, but every night compiled more data. Margot's hypocrisies, the board's silence, the pattern of abuse. My binder was growing thicker, my plan clearer. Then one morning, as I walked Ellie to the bus stop, I saw something that stopped me cold. A bright orange notice had been stapled to the utility pole near the corner. A special, emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Friday night. No time, no agenda, just a location, the clubhouse. I hadn't received a letter about this. Neither had any of the neighbors I spoke with. It was posted with the clear intent to hide it from the majority of residents. That's when I realized something. They weren't just coming after me. They were preparing to shut me down. That entire week, the energy in Maple Ridge shifted. Neighbors I used to chat with avoided my gaze. Cars slowed down as they passed my driveway. I noticed Janet, the board secretary, taking photos of my front lawn from inside her SUV. One night I saw a flash through my bedroom window, someone photographing me through the blinds. It was a witch hunt, and I was the witch. Friday came. I put Ellie to bed early, kissed her forehead, and slipped out the door with my folder in hand. The clubhouse was already lit when I arrived. Through the tall windows, I could see the board. Seated at the front, Margot in the center, smug as ever, sipping from a monogrammed coffee mug like she was preparing for a victory speech. A few residents were scattered in folding chairs, all of them handpicked, the compliant ones. I opened the door, and the room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. I walked in calmly and took a seat near the front. Margot gave me a tight smile, the kind you give someone before sticking a knife in their back. "Glad you could join us, Miss Callahan," she said. "We were just beginning." The meeting was a farce. She opened with a vague statement about growing concerns regarding neighborhood unity and member behavior, then moved directly into a motion to suspend certain privileges for residents, currently in violation of community standards. She never said my name, but everyone knew who she meant. As the board nodded along like puppets, I raised my hand. "On what legal basis are you suspending privileges?" I asked. "Our bylaws require notice, hearing, and a vote from the general membership." Margot's eyes narrowed. "We've consulted our interpretation of the charter," she said. "We believe the board has discretionary authority, pulled out a copy of the HOA's own rulebook and flipped to section 5.1. It says right here that disciplinary action requires 30 days notice and the opportunity for a formal hearing. I held the page up for the room to see. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Margot looked rattled, but she recovered quickly. "This isn't a courtroom, Ms. Callahan. This is a community." I smiled. "Then maybe you should start treating it like one." She moved to adjourn the meeting early, clearly caught off guard, but the damage was done. Residents were whispering. Doubts had been planted. I left the clubhouse with a strange mix of triumph and dread. I knew Margot wasn't going to take this lightly. She'd come harder next time. That night, I double-checked every lock in my house. I unplugged my smart devices. I even placed tape over my laptop camera. Paranoid? Maybe, but something told me this fight was about to go beyond letters and fines. I was right. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. My front lawn had been trashed, flower beds ripped up, bird feeders smashed. The gnome shattered in pieces like someone had stomped on it. Spray painted across my garage door were 3 words in sloppy red paint: HOA trash rat. Ellie cried when she saw her gnome destroyed. I hugged her tight, whispering that everything would be okay even though my heart was racing. I called the police. An officer came, took photos, and made a report. But without a witness or camera footage, they said, there wasn't much they could do. I knew who did it, maybe not directly, but Margot had stirred the pot enough to make someone feel bold. And I wasn't going to let it go. That afternoon, I installed motion sensor cameras around the house. I replaced the gnome, but this time, I glued it to a concrete base. I wasn't just going to rebuild. I was going to make sure they couldn't knock me down again. That night, I went online and created an anonymous blog, HOA Files, Maple Ridge Exposed. I uploaded photos, citations, and snippets of bylaws Margot had violated herself. I told no one it was me. I wanted the story to spread on its own. And it did. Fast. Within 24 hours, the blog had over 500 views, and someone began slipping printed copies into mailboxes around the neighborhood. I watched from my window as residents stopped to read them, saw confusion, then curiosity, then anger. The truth was starting to leak, and for the first time, Margot wasn't in control of the narrative. The board scheduled another meeting. This one was public, official, and included all residents. I knew something big was coming. Margot wouldn't sit quietly while her grip slipped. She was going to try to crush me, legally, publicly, whatever it took. But I had something she'd end, the truth. And in a few days, I'd have proof so damning, no one would ever call me crazy again. The days leading up to the meeting felt like the quiet before a storm. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact were now cautiously friendly, like they didn't want to pick a side too early. Some even knocked on my door, asking if the blog was real, if Margot really broke her own rules. I didn't confirm anything. I just handed them copies of the bylaws and let them read for themselves. People were waking up. They were starting to question the iron rule of Margot Lively. That was exactly what I wanted, but I still didn't. Have the one thing that could turn suspicion into revolution, hard evidence. So, I decided to dig deeper than I ever had before. I remembered something from my days as a paralegal. HOAs are legally required to keep certain records open to inspection by residents. Margot had denied me those records. That was strike one. But what she hadn't counted on was that those records were still being stored in the community clubhouse. I had a way in. My friend Lisa, one of the only people in the neighborhood who hadn't turned cold, worked part-time cleaning the clubhouse. She wasn't part of the HOA inner circle, but she knew where the keys were kept. One evening, I asked her for a favor. Nothing illegal, I promised. I just needed an hour alone in the clubhouse after her shift. She hesitated, but in the end, she handed me the spare key with shaking hands. Be careful, she said. If they find out, I nodded. They won't. That night, just after 10, I slipped into the dark clubhouse with a flashlight and a fireproof folder. The place was quiet, except for the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the soft click of the ceiling fan. I made my way to the back office, the one Margot always locked during meetings. The door gave way with a gentle push. Inside were metal file cabinets, dusty binders, and 2 overflowing banker boxes labeled HOA Finance. Jackpot. I opened the first drawer and started flipping through folders. Most of it was boring maintenance receipts, landscaping invoices, parking permits. But tucked in the back was a yellow folder labeled Confidential. I opened it. Inside were printouts of email exchanges between Margot and a local contractor named Brad Hastings, someone I recognized from the approved vendors list. The emails were casual, way too casual for business, flirtatious, personal, but worse, they discussed inflated invoices. Add 20% for MISC. Labor, no one checks these. One read. Another said, need extra cushion this month. Barry? It under storm drain repairs. I stared at the words in disbelief. It was embezzlement. Plain and simple. Margot and Brad were siphoning HOA funds under fake repair jobs, heart-pounding. I took photos of every email. I scanned the folders for financial records and found checks made out to Hastings contracting for amounts that didn't match the posted budgets. Margot had been funneling money, thousands of dollars, right under everyone's noses. Suddenly, it all made sense. The aggressive fines, the secrecy, the paranoia. She wasn't just a control freak. She was hiding a crime. I left the clubhouse that night with evidence that could burn the whole board down. But I knew if I revealed it too soon, they'd find a way to spin it. Margot was too good at manipulating people and needed to reveal it. When the stakes were high, when the whole neighborhood was watching, that moment was coming. The HOA's general meeting was in 3 days, and Margot had already printed flyers claiming she'd expose the lies being spread by malicious individuals. She didn't know I had her entire scam in a manila folder. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I reread the emails a dozen times. I printed out copies. I organized my photos. I rehearsed what I'd say. If I was going down, I was going down swinging. But deep down, I knew I wasn't the one on trial anymore. Margot was. And I was holding the smoking gun. The meeting was scheduled for 6 in the evening. But people started showing up by 5. Folding chairs filled up fast, and soon the room was packed wall to wall with residents, more than I'd ever seen at any HOA event. The energy was tense, electric. Margot stood at the front with her board flanking her like royal guards. She wore her signature blue blazer, pearls around her neck, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good evening," she began, her voice smooth. "Before we address new business, I want to take a moment to speak on the recent attacks on our community integrity." She spoke in long, winding sentences that said nothing, calling the blog baseless, the accusations defamatory, and the unrest manufactured. I let her talk. I let her dig her hole deeper. When she finally paused, I stood up. "Have something to share," I said, my voice calm but firm. All heads turned to me. Margot tried to interrupt, but I held up the folder. "This contains emails and financial records that show you've been awarding inflated contracts to a personal associate without board approval. And without disclosing the relationship to residents." Gasps echoed across the room. "Is theft?" I continued. "This isn't about gnomes or grass height. This is about you stealing our money." Margot's face went pale. She stuttered something about privacy, about fabricated documents, but it was too late. I handed copies to 3 different residents in the front row. I've verified everything. I've timestamps, bank records. I've already submitted them to a lawyer. If the board doesn't resign by the end of the week, this goes to the state attorney general. The room exploded. Residents shouted over each other, demanding answers, demanding resignations. Walt stood up, tried to calm everyone, but no one was listening. The trust was broken, the illusion shattered. Margot backed away from the podium, visibly trembling. I walked out of the clubhouse into the cool evening air. Behind me, chaos continued to unfold, but I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. And now, they all knew it. But the war wasn't over yet. Margot wasn't the type to go down without a fight. And I had a feeling the worst was still coming. 2 days after the meeting, the neighborhood was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. People were gathering in driveways, swapping copies of the emails I had exposed, whispering about Margot's fall from grace. Some called me a hero. Others were still cautious, not sure if they were ready to admit how deep the rot went. Make any public statements. No resignations. No apologies. Just silence, the kind that comes right before the last desperate move. And I knew Margot wouldn't go down without taking someone with her. That someone, of course, was me. The first sign came in the form of a thick envelope shoved into my mailbox, hand-delivered, no postage. Inside was a cease and desist letter from a law firm claiming I had committed defamation, harassment, and unauthorized access to HOA property. It was on heavy cream paper, full of threatening language and legal jargon meant to scare me into silence. But I wasn't scared. I'd worked in law. I knew the difference between a bluff and a bomb. This was a bluff, a desperate, sloppily crafted bluff. I smiled as I dropped it in the trash, but the next move wasn't legal. It was personal that night. My car alarm blared at 3 a.m. I ran outside to find my driver's side window smashed, my seats slashed with a knife. Nothing was stolen. It wasn't a robbery. It was a message. The police came, took another report, and once again told me there wasn't enough evidence to act on. I could see it in their faces. They thought I was just another paranoid suburban woman causing drama. The next day, Ellie's school called. Someone had anonymously reported me to Child Protective Services, claiming I left my daughter home alone for hours at a time. A caseworker showed up that afternoon. She was kind but firm. She had to investigate. I sat in my living room, answering questions while Ellie played upstairs, oblivious. And as I spoke, something shifted in me. This wasn't about Margot keeping her crown anymore. This was about destroying me. Piece by piece. That night, I called my lawyer and told him to move forward. I wanted to file a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office. I also wanted to pursue civil action against Margot Lively and the board. He agreed, and we began gathering everything. Timestamps, signatures, resident testimonies, and the full financial audit of the HOA's past 2 years. It was a mountain of evidence, enough to bury them. But just as I thought I was finally ahead, I got a call from Lisa, the one who helped me access the clubhouse. "They're coming after me now," she whispered. "They fired me, said I breached community trust. And someone egged my front door last night." My stomach dropped. Lisa had nothing to do with this beyond handing me a key. She didn't even know what I found. But Margot was lashing out at anyone she could reach. "I'll fix this," I promised her, and I meant it. I started contacting other residents, the quiet ones, the ones who had once been too scared to speak up. I knocked on doors. I handed out copies of the documents. I explained everything, the fake contracts, the secret kickbacks, the harassment, and slowly, the tide turned. People weren't just angry, they were furious. We organized a petition, a formal demand for the immediate removal of the entire board. We got signatures from over 70% of the neighborhood in 2 days. The pressure worked. Margot cracked. That Friday, she called an emergency meeting, her last attempt to control the story. She walked into the clubhouse, looking thinner, paler, like she hadn't slept in days. Her pearl necklace was gone. So was the smug smile. She took the podium with shaking hands. "There have been allegations," she began, voice trembling, "and while I maintain my innocence, I believe it's in the best interest of the community for me to step down." No one clapped. No one thanked her. We all just watched as she walked out, her clipboard swinging at her side like a broken weapon. The rest of the board resigned over the weekend. Walt left without a word. Janet posted a long, defensive Facebook rant before disappearing. Timothy simply vanished. But it wasn't over yet, not for me. The damage Margot had caused didn't vanish with her resignation. Lisa was still unemployed. My garage door still bore the faint red stains from the graffiti. Ellie still asked if the bad people were coming back. And I still had a civil suit to file. I knew Margot wouldn't go quietly into her retirement. She'd fight. Hire lawyers. She tried to spin the story to protect her name. But now, I wasn't alone. The neighborhood stood with me, and we were ready for whatever came next. The final act wasn't loud, didn't start with sirens or lawsuits or a dramatic televised arrest. It began with silence. Strange, heavy kind of calm that settled over Maple Ridge Estates, like fog after a storm. Margot was gone. Her clipboard, her threats, her smug patrols all vanished. But the damage lingered. People were cautious now, wary. The gates of the community still clicked shut every night. But the sense of control that had once gripped us was broken. And in that silence, something remarkable started to happen. People started talking to each other, not in whispers, not in fear, but in solidarity. The woman on Spruce Lane invited her neighbors over for coffee. The couple on Birch Street put up a community message board. The HOA was no longer a weapon. It was being rebuilt, carefully, transparently, and with every resident watching closely. But, for me, things weren't over. I still had the court dates circled on my calendar, the civil suit against Margot and the former board members for fraud, harassment, and abuse of power. My lawyer had filed everything: the audit results, the paper trail, the statements from residents like Mrs. Carter and Lisa. Every document was a nail in Margot's coffin. She tried to delay it, of course. Her new attorney sent motion after motion, arguing I had accessed documents unlawfully, that the emails were taken out of context. But it was noise, desperate noise, because nothing could explain the money. During the forensic audit, we discovered over $76,000 unaccounted for in the HOA's finances over a 2-year period. Most of it linked to repairs by Brad Hastings, the contractor who had suddenly left town when the blog went viral. Invoices were bogus. The payments were real. Margot's signature was on nearly every check. It wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. The Attorney General's office opened an investigation. It wasn't long before Margot was forced into a deposition. I wasn't allowed to be in the room, but my lawyer told me afterward she folded like paper when presented. With the invoices, the emails, and the resident testimonies, she didn't even argue. She just sighed and said, "I was trying to help the community." That line made me laugh. Help? She used our money to line her pockets, then terrorized anyone who questioned her. That wasn't help. That was theft wrapped in a silk scarf. Lisa got her job back, not as a cleaner, but as the new community liaison for the interim board. They gave her a raise and public recognition at the next neighborhood meeting. Mrs. Carter was reimbursed for her bogus fines. And for the first time since her husband passed, she put up Halloween decorations again. A single jack-o'-lantern on her porch. A quiet act of rebellion. Ellie started sleeping through the night again. The nightmares faded. One afternoon, she planted a new gnome in our flower bed, smaller, purple, with crooked little teeth. She named it Justice. I told her it was perfect. As for me, I didn't stop. The blog became something bigger, a resource for other neighborhoods, other victims of corrupt HOAs. People began emailing me from across the country, sharing stories, asking for advice. I never planned to become the face of an anti-HOA movement. I just wanted to protect my home. But sometimes that's how revolutions start, not with shouting, but with one stubborn woman refusing to move a painted gnome. The day the court ruled in my favor, I didn't celebrate. I didn't pop champagne or post online. I just walked out of that courthouse, looked up at the sky, and took a breath. It was over. I had one. And for the first time since that first stupid warning letter arrived, I felt truly free. They called me crazy, a troublemaker, a drama queen. But they were wrong. I was just paying attention, and I never stopped.